Tool's second album is named Ænima, though I do believe that for most people, in the past 23 years, they have probably stated the name of this album incorrectly. Probably only the obsessive-compulsive Tool fans have gone with Ænima, which is what the album is really meant to be called. Whenever you sound it out, it's based off of the actual structure of the title. Ænima is an interesting album for Tool, and one that could perhaps go down as their true masterpiece. Though, whenever it comes to talking about Tool masterpieces, that is kind of like throwing darts at a dartboard. You're going to have various folks of differing levels of fandom really pick and choose their favorites. There's going to be many that are going to point to the latter days, since that's what got them into the group, while others may go with the early days, considering it does hold and harbor great nostalgic memory. However, Ænima is a little bit different by comparison to some of the other albums that surround it. It did have a single, the single being Stinkfist, the very first cutoff of this disc, and it too was sort of mired within the same controversy that was seen with prior singles off of Undertow. This was a group that still was going through a bit of a privacy war and still was having a battle with censorship. Although Ænima itself was an album that was able to retain most of its structure, Stinkfist was yet again another music video that was had its title name changed to track number 1 whenever it was played on MTV or The Box. Really, at this point, they couldn't ignore the songs themselves, but they had to have a lot of changes made, that way they could get on the air. And they wanted Tool on the air because Tool was certainly becoming a phenomenon. Ænimima's album, though, feels like one that doesn't have sort of that key or that pop single. You know, whenever we talk about Undertow, we immediately spoke about Prison Sex, but especially the song Sober. Sober being one of their trademark classic tracks that everybody remembers. And on future releases, there will also be trademark tracks that feel like they attach to that album and do so like magnets. You know, it is what the album is perhaps best remembered for because it is the gateway drug into the experience. Ænima doesn't really have that, though Push It could be a great example of that. Maybe Eulogy, all depending on what song it was that you really latched yourself onto. Stinkfist is another, great example, obviously, since it did get some rotation. But there's a lot of tracks on here that just feel like they have that power to really latch you and bring you in. And that's why Ænima might be subtly the true masterpiece of Tool's discography, considering they crafted this album that feels very story-based and very much like you didn't need... you could be introduced at any point of this disc and feel like you were a part of it. You could easily go to Eulogy and transition directly into H, and then Useful Idiot 46 and 2, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're down at Third Eye, and you've listened to the whole entire record, and about an hour of your life is now gone. You're enjoying that experience so much. The way in which this disc was built and placed together is one thing that really sparks it as a true listenable masterpiece, because it just has this natural flow to it. Now, there's jokes that are on here. There are things that actually cause a little bit of inside stir, such as the Message to Harry Manback, which is an actual, recording that was on the answering machine of a former member of Green Jelly, kind of going back and throwing out that whole connection that the band had. If you don't know about that connection, go back and watch the Undertow video. It was briefly explained. But then you get a little bit of a subconscious mix of what this band does. And again, Undertow underpinned this a little bit with some of the longer tracks and the deeper polyrhythms. However, whenever you listen to Ænima, should I say, this is where everything became a little bit more polished. And that heavy sound that Undertow was really able to underpin is starting to strip away a little bit more in favor of more experimentation, of more art rock, of more alternative music. Having that metal still be there in the heaviness of the guitar or perhaps the complexity of the rhythm, however, having it take on a very different face and almost morph right before our very eyes. We were almost witnessing Tool's own evolution with Ænima, and that album, as a result, can be seen as the critical point between this side of the band in the 1990s and the side of the band that we got in the 2000s, starting with their next album, Lateralis. And as a result, this disc feels very dynamic. And the sequential bliss of it also shows their ability to put together a strong track listing that doesn't feel like it needs to go about some of the critical music tropes of keeping your long songs for the end, or always having a single on track number 3. Tool didn't care about these conventions, and it was something that once again was brought forth by the success of Ænima, because despite not really having that pop single, it still was a magnificent release and was one that was latched onto by a lot of fans. I would be very curious to know which of these albums, whether it be Ænima or Undertow, is found with more favor and more respect among the fan base. Perhaps place your answer in the comments below. I'm curious, because to me, whenever I listen to these two, it's an easy choice for me. I love Undertow, but Ænima just feels like that album that I could listen to from track 1 to track 15 7 times in a day and enjoy it each and every time. I can hear one track from this and know exactly what would be coming next and immediately would want to listen to it. It's the album that pops, and it's not necessarily because it was my introduction to the band. I knew of the band prior to this album's dropping. I remember seeing the hype around this album's release in catalogs or really in display cases whenever I walked past music stores whenever I was 12 years old back in 1996. It's incredible that all of these memories do really precipitate just from one event. But this is seen as extremely important also, considering that same video that was being, blocked by MTV wasn't being blocked by the box and other forms of video, music video distribution. So as a result, that artesian side of Tool was continuing to build its own personal legend. But we haven't quite reached maybe the height of Tool's artistic endeavors. Perhaps that would come next. We need to go from the 90s to the bold new era of the millennium in order to talk about Tool's next album. It took a little longer this time. There were some lawsuits that they had to take care of. Feels very similar to whenever we talk about Fear Inoculum later this week. But the next album may actually have been one of the biggest reasons why a second generation of Tool fans were born instantaneously. Stick with me for the next video. I'm CoverkillerNation, and I'll see you then.